Welcome to the second trial episode of the Challenger Corner. It has been a very eventful week for the Challenger Tour, especially with a lot of classics throughout this week. It's been everywhere across the 6 tournaments, so bear with me for a lot of yep regarding those classics, alongside some headline titles like Toby Samuel's Hersonisa sweep, as well as Pavel Kotov's double this week, and a lot more from this week's Challenger events. But firstly, we start with the 175 notes. This is for the Challenger 175 events, which for last week took place in both Phoenix and Cap Cana. And this is where I leave my notes for singles and doubles alike, because there have been a lot of stories from both tournaments alike. I'm going to start from the Phoenix Challenger, because on the first day of the main draw action, Terence Atman had an early exit to Darwin Blanche, 6-4, 6-4. So this was an on-paper upset, but the difference between both players was like Terence being passed at times, especially under pressure. But also note that thanks to Gilcross for this one, so Darwin has been training with Juan Ignacio Chela, apparently, in Buenos Aires, moving his base from initially Alicante. So watch out for more of his progress. Although not now, not necessarily soon, so we are going to let him develop. But he had a 3-set second round exit to Billy Harris in the second round. It was sort of like 4-6, 7-6, 7-6, with Billy staying clutch at the third set tiebreak. So fair enough. The second note I would like to make for Phoenix, singles especially, is watch out for Jay Friend, who qualified for the event, also starting from the pre-qualifying as he's a University of Arizona senior. So he defeated Stefan Kozlov in 3 sets in first round of the main draw, and then he had his first top 100 match in the second round against Marcos Giron. In that round, Jay had 4 match points saved, around 1 or 2 of them over Marcos' forehand winner, but both players' point construction margins were so thin over time. I think I remember condensing this match because how light that was, despite the fast-paced beginnings of the match. At least the first set or so looked like a partial surface to me. The third note is about Billy Harris, because after defeating Darwin Blanche in the second round over 3 sets, the grit he needed to also survive the scenic route quarterfinals against Adrian Manarino was also, what can I say? It was also class. Because Billy should have served for the match in the 10th game of the second set. Let's say that Adrian had ideas. Adrian even tried to get to Billy's defenses at some points earlier in the 8th game of the second set, but Billy still held that game massively to 5-3. However, Billy lost to Ethan Quinn in the semifinals with 2 tiebreak sets. But I'd like to expand this match a little bit more in the Classics nominations because of how topsy-turvy this match had been, since it took 3 hours and 20 minutes. And not to mention, in the same semifinal later that night, local time, Marcos Giron, who I mentioned defeated Jay Friend in the second round, also came back from a set and a breakdown to Korangtang Mute, the first seed, to make it to the final. So I'm going to break down the finals later on in the weekly final section. And now we move on to the Cap Cana Challenger. So one of the main stories in this tournament, Hubert Hurkacz returned to playing So note that he was sidelined for a semester due to the knee injury he sustained in Wimbledon last year. Before he started his singles before he started his singles campaign, he played doubles with his coach, Matt Terzinski, against Daniel Zuckerman and Trey Hildebrand. So Daniel and Trey won 6-4, 1-6, 10-5, and it's mostly thanks to their net play, especially in the first set and match tiebreak. Fair play in the second set that Hubie and Matt nailed thanks to putting Daniel and Trey back, like to the back of the court, noticing some shot winners came from the baseline, but the net and some second serve issues also did it for in Daniel and Trey's favor that round. So the next day, Hubie started his singles campaign in the second round because as a fourth seed, he received a bye, right? So Hubie lost his second round match to Mattia Bellucci 6-2, 6-4, and that's even though there was a rain delay in between, and then Hubie tried to also break back in the middle of the second set. But Hubie initially also had break points later in the second set and even went to break back to 3-3 in that sense, but some forehand margins weren't it in that sense. Notice there are some unforced errors somewhere in that wing, and frankly, Mattia handled the situation well. Hubie's second serves at the time also didn't do justice, and that's a perfect opportunity for Mattia to sort of strike back, and that contributed to his break in the penultimate game, and he eventually won the match. I know it takes time to get back to Hubie's level before the injury, so gotta cut him some slack, alright? Not to mention that in the first round of the singles match, Dalibor Swartzina defeated 7th seed Christian Garin 6-4, 6-4. Okay, that looked like an on paper upset. And the other night there was also a duel between former top 10 players as Roberto Bautista Agut took on David Goffin, but Roberto won that one 6-1, 6-4. Right. So the other note from the Cap Cana Challenger is actually there are some layers of drama in the singles matches starting from the second round. So first of all, Alexander Blocks previously survived a scenic route in the second round when he defeated Dalibor Sportsina 7-6, 6-7, 6-3. So Alex was up a break twice in the second set. Dalibor struck back, but also note that Dalibor was up a break too in the first set. Before there was a chance he had to serve for the set, but it was foiled if I'm not mistaken. But Alex found his footing again in the third set, and especially in the penultimate game where Dalibor's errors in the last few points of the penultimate game also didn't help. On the other hand, Coleman Wong actually had a likely top 100 debut with a deep run, but he lost his second qualifying round match to Martin Landaluce, and then there was a withdrawal which allowed Coleman to ascend to the main draw as a lucky loser. But after winning in 3 sets against Roman Andres Buruchaga in the first round, Coleman somehow survived the second round drama against Damir Jumhur. Check the incident stuff on a separate upload of mine a couple of days ago. I remember it was over. Actually, Coleman is like celebrating being up 2 breaks, right? Like 4-1 in the final set. And then telling either himself or his box to, okay, I need to keep this momentum going. I couldn't blame him on that. But then that was also what Damir confronted in the changeover. Coleman got the third set like 6-2, But there was no handshake after that. And when Jumhur exited the court, he was met with cheers from the crowd. And somehow Coleman got the cheers. So in the quarterfinals, Alex and Coleman met. And this match ended with Alex winning 4-6, 7-5, 6-3. And especially after surviving that one heck of the fourth game in the second set as well. But after Alex found the footing again, as always, there went the scenic route. Okay, that was also another 3-setter from Alexander Blocks. And in the semifinals, he was met by Mariano Navone, who knocked out Valentang Roye 6-2, 7-6. Yeah, that was the scoreline. So it was also an entire epic in itself, especially the last set. So both of them shared a set of ease, like 6-3, 3-6. So there went the third set. Mariano was up 4-1 in the third set. And then there was a moment Alex took a medical timeout in, if I'm not mistaken, after that game. Alex tried to find that footing again, especially from his forehand side, and he went back to at least 4-4. And then there went the third set tiebreak to settle the entire match. But Mariano was in the front of that since the setup, and he somehow made it through the final. The third set was also insane, judging from how they constructed their points, the offenses they took, but it came down to a few points at the end. And that sent Mariano to his maiden hardcourt final ever. But be sure to check the spectacle of the second half of the match. I think I remember condensing that match as well. It was very epic. Not to mention that Mattia Bellucci also pulled a comeback win, also from a set and a breakdown, against Adam Walton. And for the finals, of course, I'm going to leave that to the weekly finals section. And now on to the doubles notes of these 175 tournaments. So I'm going to start with the Cap Cana finals, especially because if you notice the other side of the draw, like the semifinals and finals, you'll find two contrasting halves. So one half was like the informed pairs. I refer to informed pairs here as the challenger level informed pairs. In some ways or another, they made deep runs or they have paired together for some time or somewhere along those lines. And the other half is like the more experienced pairs, which made that an interesting clash when each winner met in the finals. So the doubles finals there featured Daniel Zuckerman and Trey Hildebrand and Romain Arneaudo and Marcelo de Moliner. To be fair, it was Daniel's maiden 175 final. Note that he runner-up Valencia, which was a 125 event last year, if I'm not mistaken. But at the same time, it was also Trey's maiden 175 final. But he won a 125 in Saint-Tropez with McGeiger. And he just won a 100 in San Diego also with McGeiger, within the span of a few months. In fact, Daniel and Trey were at the opposite end of the Valencia 125 semifinals. So Daniel won that one with Inigo Cervantes, and they runner-up that tournament against Marcelo de Moliner and Orlando Luz. So Daniel and Trey started with playing Hubie and Matt, as I previously mentioned, and that ended with a match tiebreak. After defeating first seed Santiago Gonzalez and David Pell 6-4, 6-4, yes, that David Pell who made the finals in Wimbledon as alternate with Rinky Hijikata. They also survived a match tiebreak in the semifinals against Sriram Balaji and Neil Oberleitner, who defeated them in straight sets in the previous week back in Thionville. I remember it was rather 6-4, 6-1 loss, but they won through a match tiebreak in Kepkana semifinals. On the other end of the court, there was Romang Arneodo, who literally won Monte Carlo Masters 1000 with Manuel Guinard, who made it to the Indian Wells final. And I'd like to tell about some Indian Wells doubles finals later in the doubles watch section because it was really fun. And Romang and Marcelo won 7-6, 3-6, 10-6. I think I also would like to credit the experience under pressure because, especially in the match tiebreak, I noticed the second serves from Daniel and Trey sort of broke down in some sense. Like, that's despite them trying to raise their level in the second set, finding their lobs and net play, which can be rather risky, especially in the first set. But fair play that especially Romang and Demos returns as well, doing that damage in some other parts of the match, while I'm crediting Demos for hands as well near the end. It was amazing, admittedly, and they took advantage of the situation really well. So well done for that. And they just paired for the tournament and they ended up winning the whole thing. Meanwhile, in the Phoenix Challenger, we had Hugo Nis and Edward Roger Vaselang, who took on Diego Hidalgo and Patrick Terhatch in the final. Okay, make that two Monegasque players in the doubles finals. Both Romang Arneodo in Kepkana and then Hugo Nis in the Phoenix Challenger. So, Hugo and Edward faced neat tests, especially since in the first two rounds, like the first round and the quarterfinals, the match ended in match tiebreak in which they won. So in the first round, Hugo and Edward defeated reunited wildcards Nathaniel Lemons and Jackson Withrow 6-4, 6-7, 10-5, and that was also an amazing watch, especially after they had a match point fumbled in the second set tiebreak over a +1 error from Hugo and Edward's end, and then Nate and Jackson somehow found their baseline level back to some extent, but the setup of the match tiebreak at that time also weren't it, and Hugo and Edward took advantage. They also faced match tiebreak against Ohio State alumni Robert Cash and JJ Tracy 3-6, 6-3, 10-8. That looks light, but they didn't survive the match tiebreak in the finals when they faced Diego and Patrick, in which Diego and Patrick won that final 6-7, 6-3, 10-4. It was a great match tiebreak showing for both Diego and Patrick. The pair won the other Lyon Challenger, the indoor one in Dessine Charpieu, together last year as a pair, but they have yet to win even a 175 event. So it looked like their second title together. They didn't drop a set before the final and even won 7-5, 6-4 against Luke Johnson and Jan Zielinski. Yes, that Jan Zielinski who thrived at the start of the year in the United Cup with Kashiakawa. Alright, so those were the 175 notes, leaving the finals, including those two events, in the weekly finals. So we had 6 events that week, especially because it was the second week of the Indian Wells Masters 1000, and that's why we had those two 175 events. But in the order of their conclusion, we are starting with the second Hersonisos Challenger Finals, where second seed Toby Samuel defeated Maxim Murva 6-2, 6-3 to clinch his 4th career challenger title in the span of 4 until 5 months. So he swept the title in the final fortnight of the 2025 season in both Soma Bay and the second Manama Challenger, and now he swept the first 2 Hersonisos Challenger events, just like last week when he won against Harry Wendelken 6-3, 6-0, and now it's It's another straight set victory for Toby. So it looked straightforward at first, and the pace might have looked faster if you watch the match, considering how the rallies went. But Toby was rather a breakdown at the start of both first and second sets. Not sure specifically why, except if you notice how those unforced errors happened. But he tried to come back by going after Maxim's margins, especially realizing that Maxim's second serves were rather problematic. Like throughout the match, Maxim only won like 35% of his second serve points if it wasn't any indication. Still, Toby defended side by side really well, and he did not even hesitate to move forward if he needed to, and there were several important occasions where he finished either near or at the net with some volleys, or often just pass that forehand right away at the net. But yeah, Maxim's rush, especially in finishing some of those points, also didn't help. And that's even though he saved 3 match points at the end of the match, one of them with a forehand winner. It's just insufficient. And Toby's Hersonisa sweep, alongside an ITF M25 title in Valley du Lubu several weeks back, helped him to secure his top 200 debut at 175. At 171, if I'm not mistaken. Meanwhile, the second Kigali Challenger, which final started at the same time with the second Hersonisos Challenger finals, had top seed Marco Trongeliti defeated 8th seed Marco Kekinato 4-6, 6-0, 6-3, marking Trongeliti's second title in the event since winning the Kigali 2 Challenger as well in 2024 when it was a 75. This one is a 100. This is Battle of the Marcos, so I might refer them to their surnames in that regard. So Marco Kekinato was slightly more aggressive earlier in the first set, and he was up a break somewhere earlier, and Trongeliti started to break back moments after finding his drop shot. I think it was the second point where he found it. But there was a loose service game in the 10th game of the first set, in which Kekinato tried to take advantage from and ended up breaking for the first set because Trongeliti couldn't find the line moments after Kekinato passed his forehand somewhere for one of the set points. But Trongeliti somehow maintained his level in the second set when he broke early at 1-0, if I'm not mistaken, doubled the break, but at the first changeover of the second set, Kekinato had to take a medical timeout over a back issue or somewhere along those lines. Still, Trongeliti did what he had to do in that set, dominated that second set through the baseline too, especially. And he started the third set well with eventually a break in the 5th game despite Kekinato's best efforts. And he even had 3 match points in the 9th game because Kekinato had a loose service game. Kekinato saved at least 3 or 4 of those match points, but Trongeliti still broke for the title. All of these weren't possible without Trongeliti's 2 match point saves against Jonas Voreitek in the second round. If I'm not mistaken, it was thanks to a drop shot and a forehand winner somewhere in those 2 points, as well as coming back from behind a few times in his quarterfinal match against Max Hawks. Yes, it was a roller coaster ride. I will tell more about it later on. But if it weren't for these 2 comebacks, this title wouldn't have happened. So this sends Trongeliti to around 116 with the title, 4 lines below his previous career high ranking of 112 in 2019. No jinx, but This might open up a chance for him to debut in the top 100 and become the oldest to do so. But we'll see if that happens in this clay season. We are still in March, but I think nothing is impossible. Who knows? The third challenger level final for that week was the Cherbourg Challenger, where Pavel Kotov defeated qualifier Filippo Romano 6-2, 7-5. Filippo came from the qualies and played a couple of three-setters en route to the final, including the 3-hour match against fellow qualifier Patrick Brady and the other epic semifinal against Yuri Rodionov. He also won 2 challenger doubles titles last year in Toby and Biella, and that might have explained why he also had decent volleys, because he frequently plays doubles. Back to the singles finals, the first parts of this match looked like out-hitting each other's forehands, and then Filippo also managing some nerve somewhere in between, and then Pavel being more aggressive as well. And then Filippo's backhands also appeared more vulnerable in some instances, and that might have explained how Pavel dominated the first set after especially finding his backhand line before doubling his break to 5-2 in that set. But Filippo tried to raise his level in the second set. He tried to, you might have noticed, there were more volleys somewhere. He was clutch by saving several break points, including those in the third game, if I'm not mistaken. But while his forehands got run over several times throughout both sets, the last 2 points, if I'm not mistaken, of the penultimate game, where his backhand errors contributed to Pavel's break to 6-5, also didn't help. Just not enough. And by winning Cherbourg Challenger, Pavel won his 5th career Challenger title, his second of this year, after winning the Koblenz Challenger several weeks ago against Tom Gensch. It was an epic as well if you check the condensed match of the Koblenz final, where he saved 2 match points in the third set tiebreak, if I'm not mistaken. And this marked Pavel's return to the top 300 with ranking 271, if I'm not mistaken, by the end of the tournament. So the next challenger level final concluded that week was one of the 2 175-point event in Cap Cana, where 6th seed Mariano Navone defeated Mattia Bellucci 7-5, 6-4. So as I said in the 175 notes, Mariano survived a scenic route from 4-1 up in the third set into the third set tiebreak against Alexander Blocks in the semifinals, while Mattia came back from a set and a breakdown to Adam Walton at the same round. So back to the final match. The setup of the first set was an actual roller coaster. So Mattia initially broke early to 2-0 thanks to some of the forehand work, and then he got broken back to 2-1 after committing several unforced errors, one of which effectively foiling his game point then, and then Mariano upped his level and aggression, having that smash to break to 3-2 and got broken back to 4-4 over 3 consecutive forehand unforced errors, followed by a failed smash for the break back. And then there was a drama before he broke to 6-5. So the drama happened because there was a time violation for Mattia, who claimed that there was a phone ringing at the stands, but the umpire said it happened even before the phone was ringing, and then they called the supervisor. But even after that situation, Mattia still got broken to 6-5 over another series of forehand unforced errors, I'd say, even if the first 3 break points were saved. And another one, there was a heat delay since it was very hot and humid for an hour and 20 minutes. Mariano then started the way the first point was started, with a sort of a lengthy exchange ended with his forehand winner finish before taking the first set 7-5. After that, Mariano had a dominant showing in the second set, and he theoretically should have served for the match at 5-2, but there might have been some tightness in between, and Mattia tried to get his level back somewhere before breaking back to 5-3, still holding to 5-4, but Mariano successfully served things out in the final game to take that second set 6-4. Note that this was Mariano's first ever hardcore title, his second Challenger 175 title after winning the Cagliari Challenger title in 2024, where he defeated Lorenzo Musetti of all people, making him the first person to win a Challenger 175 title in both clay and hard courts, as well as winning his first Challenger title of this year after winning the Lima Los Incas Challenger last year in Peru, as well as winning his 9th career Challenger title. Up next was the Santiago Challenger final, where Genaro Alberto Olivieri defeated 4th seed and last week's Brasilia Challenger title Henrique Rocha 6-4, 6-4. They came from contrasting semifinals where Genaro knocked out Thiago Monteiro in 3 tight sets, while Henrique defeated Pedro Boscardin Dias 6-1, 6-2 in the other half of the semifinal. This match had a topsy-turvy start as well as visible in the first 2 games, where Henrique found his forehand winner somewhere before breaking early to 1-0, but Genaro found his forehand winner right in time to break back 1-1, and then the margins from the grounds were further tested in the first set as well, where some unforced errors on Henrique's end couldn't help that resulted in Genaro taking the first set 6-4, and then this continued somewhere in the second set, also despite the roller coaster start of it all. And Genaro actually broke 5-2 after there was a close call on Henrique's second serve or something moments after a forehand error before that double break happened. But Henrique somehow found a way to break back 5-3 and still hold 5-4, especially after there was also a nice volley finish before he held 5-4. But Genaro finished the match nicely with the hold to clinch the title at the end, which marked his 3rd career Challenger title after winning the Montevideo Challenger in 2022 and Santo Domingo in 2023. That marked his return to the top 200. If you remember how he made it to the 3rd round of the French Open or Roland Garros back in 2023, hide your faves, shall he return to that level? And last but not the least, wrapping up the Challenger level finals that week was the Phoenix Challenger, where 8th seed Ethan Quinn, who turned 22 during the week of the tournament, defeated 7th seed Marcos Giron 7-6, 4-6, 7-5. This was a battle of national champions. We refer to the collegiate ones like the NCAA, if I'm not mistaken, where Ethan won in 2023 when he attended the Georgia Tech, while Marcos won the 2014 event when he attended the UCLA. Ethan was clutch enough coming into these finals by winning 4 tiebreak sets in total for both quarterfinals and semifinals when he defeated Benjamin Bonzi and Billy Harris respectively. And he only dropped one tiebreak set rather, in the first round against Alexander Shevchenko, and Marcos came back from a set and a breakdown to knock out first seed Korangtong Mute. So the first set of this match was a partial service, which question was Marcos' second serves, that also contributed to Ethan's tie breadstick because he won that 7-1. The start of the tiebreak was like Marcos' double fault, and then Ethan just built on from there. The only point Ethan conceded in that tiebreak was due to a +1 error in the middle of that tiebreak. And then Ethan was also up a break in the second set, but Marcos found his forehands back to break back to 3-2, more specifically with a forehand winner right after Ethan had a game point foiled over a double fault, if I'm not mistaken. And then after Marcos went back on track with a hold to 3-3, he ended up lobbing his way several points before he broke and eventually taking the second set 6-4. And then he tried to keep that level in the third set, but Ethan was just too clutch. He moved forward often when he needed to, including minimizing a deficit or even saving another round of breakpoints. So by the penultimate game of this match, thanks to Gilcross once again, Ethan saved 18 out of 21 breakpoints. By the 12th game, Ethan came up with a cross-court forehand winner finish at the third point, and somehow he had a match point that he converted through another shot winner to clinch just his second challenger title after winning the Champagne Challenger in 2024. He also runner-up Cleveland at the same year and Canberra in 2025, which he lost to Joao Fonseca. Joao won Phoenix last year and Ethan won Phoenix this year as well. After recapping the weekly finals, it is time to give a shout out to the classic matches. I know it was a very eventful week of all the classics that I found it hard to shortlist from, but Twitter only allowed like 4 options for the carryover match of the week poll, but I know who would have lived to witness all of these. Anyway, one of the first matches I had in mind for the nomination is the Kigali 2 Challenger quarterfinal between Marco Trungeliti and Max Hawks. Marco was initially up a double break to 4-1, but he almost multiplied the break again in the 6th game, where Max eventually held to 4-2, and then Marco had his chances to seal the set, had the opportunity to serve for the first set, as well as had set points in the second as well, but it didn't come through, and the tiebreak had to settle that set, where Max initially had to fumble set points before taking that set 7-6, with the tiebreak score being 8-6. And then Marco broke early to 2-0 but got broken back somewhere. And then there was a moment Max almost sealed the match had he converted his breakpoint in the 8th game, but it didn't happen because Marco massively held to 4-4. And theoretically, Max was close to win because he was technically 2 points away in both the 10th and the 12th game, but Marco dug deep that even he foiled Max's mini break at 5-3 in the second set tiebreaker thanks to a swift return, but Max failed smash caused Mark to take the second set 7-6 once again with 7-5 as the tiebreak score. This took a toll on Max, however. He had an impromptu medical timeout somewhere in the 3rd game of the 3rd set, and then Marco did what he had to do and won the 3rd set as well, 6-3. And that was the first one I had in mind. The second one for Phoenix, I had several matches in mind, but I eventually settled on Adrian Manarino getting Billy Harris. I think I remember telling some parts of this match as well in the 175 notes, but I'd like to share even more here. But for the first 2 matches, I have it condensed somewhere on this channel, on this YouTube channel, so be sure to check on those. Do not miss the momentum changes. But also check the ATP Challengers official channel because they also had some stuffs, especially from the 175s. So back to Adrian Manarino and Billy Harris quarterfinal match. Billy initially broke early in the first set to 2-1, but got broken back to 4-4 for some reason. But he went back up to 5-4, and still took the first set 6-4. Alright, leave it at that. The roller coaster only started in the second set despite Billy breaking early to 1-0. I had to credit his backhands in some of these occasions because when it worked as a shot winner. But starting the 8th game of the second set, Adrian started to strike back from the way he handled some longer exchanges when he started redirecting and then tried to get the best out of Billy's margins. But then at some occasions, Billy found some tight openings and anticipated it well, passed well as well in some occasions. Billy massively held that game to 5-3 after foiling several breakpoints in that regard. But then, Billy had a forehand error that saved his match point in the 9th game of the second set that caused Adrian to break back to 5-5, 2 points after that. Take that 2 games later in the second set tiebreak, and Billy was up a mini break earlier in the tiebreak, but Adrian even scored a timely forehand pass to take that second set 7-6, with 7-4 as the final tiebreak score. So there went the deciding set, where Adrian initially broke 4-3 due to Billy's forehand errors in the last few points, before Billy broke back to 4-4 thanks to his smashes. But the scoreboard pressure question was asked, and Billy eventually broke for the win to 6-4 after out-hitting Adrian's baseline game in that situation, out-hitting his forehands, if I'm not mistaken. Speaking of the 175 Challenger events, Capcana also delivered in its own way, but more specifically, I'm nominating the semi-final match between Alexander Blocks and 6th Mariano Navone. Both players shared a set apiece. Alex took the first set 6-3, and Mariano also took the second set 6-3, even if he survived a break point somewhere in the 6th game of the second set. He then led all the way to 4-1 in the third set, from which Alex took a medical timeout for some issues, but he hit some nice forehands that contributed to him being back on track to 4-4, and fast forward to the either 11 or there was a point there where both players gave all the way they can, and Mariano even hit like a pass, if I'm not mistaken, while Alex fell to the ground at some point, because both epically defending until Mariano finished that rally. I think it was the 11th game, if I'm not mistaken, before he held to 6-5. And then both of them had to settle this match in another tiebreak, which Mariano took the set from. They ended with a warm embrace at the net, and they had a good fight, but Mariano eventually clinched the title. And this third set epic eventually leading to this match winning the ball. And the last one was a rough call because I had several other matches in mind, mostly between either some Santiago epics or that one in Hersonisos 2 or even Cherbourg, but I eventually settled with that almost 3-hour drama between Filippo Romano and Patrick Brady, where eventually it all came down to the last bits of both the second and the third set, where Patrick gave all he got, but to no avail. Filippo did well in that regard, and that somehow shaped the ball. But I also would like to honorably mention the likes of, like when Jayfriend took on Marcos Giron in the second round of the Phoenix Challenger, for example, or the second round epic between Alexander Blocks again and Dalibor Sforcina with another scenic route going on there, or some epic comebacks happening in these 175s, but eventually I had to cut them for some other more epic options. Basically, I almost ran out of space shortlisting all of these, but it was all worth it at the end. Moving on to the trajectory watch, we had several interesting things that can be followed up within the next few weeks. So for this week, for instance, Dani Vallejo did confirm his top 100 debut at 99 after runner-upping Brasilia and then having the quarterfinal run in Santiago. And his next tournament, rather, is his home challenger in Asuncion, where he tried to confirm that top 100 ranking. Also credits to Gringo Schneider, who has been with him these past few months. So Dani can follow the footsteps of Ramon Delgado as well, who was the last Paraguayan to reach the top 100. The next thing before we move on to the clay season in general is following up Mariano Navone's hardcourt game after the Cap Cana Challenger, because looking at how he ended up winning the title, it felt like in that kind of pacing, he adjusted well from what we know how he played in the clay events, and who knows that it could be a start of something on the hard courts. And the last one is I'm interested in following Filippo Romano's potential after that revelation in the Cherbourg Challenger. The way he constructed his points at best, not to mention that when he needed to, he would volley, and how he became more offensive in one way or another. It could be something of watch, especially for the upcoming, not necessarily indoors, but Italy also has some few events. And while his challenger doubles titles came at home back in Italy, following up what's next for him could also be something to look forward to. By the way, some double shoutouts here are not necessarily the challenger ones after I shouted out the finals of the 175 events, because the doubles events in the Indian Wells Master 1000 are very much worth watching, worth following, including the finals. So this is a rare Masters 1000 shout out to firstly Guido Andreozzi and Manuel Guinard, who defeated Cousins and Texas A&M alumni Arthur Rinderknecht and Valentang Fachero 7-6, 6-3. This is Guido's maiden Masters 1000 and Manu's second after winning the Monte Carlo Masters 1000 last year with Romang Arneodo. And this is also the Cousins' first runner-up as a pair. The Cousins firstly played together in the Australian Open earlier this year, but they crashed out to Kevin Krawitz and Tim Hughes. This men's doubles final was a fun watch, with some tiny margins being involved, but Guido and Manu nailed some pressing moments on return as well. The way they found the tight openings, the open courts where especially both of them tried to come to the net, but they ended up either lobbing or passing somewhere. And despite Arthur and Val's best anticipation that allowed them to break back at the 10th game of the first set, Guido and Manu were just too good, including especially at the net and finding the open court in general. The women's doubles final there had Katarina Siniakova and Taylor Townsend winning the event. And finally, another Masters 1000 outside of the Grand Slam titles. And the mixed doubles invitationals were won by Belinda Bencic and Flavio Cobolli, who defeated first seeds Gabriela Dabrowski and Lloyd Glasspool, also in a match tiebreak. So Gabby and Lloyd tried to nail some net exchanges as shown at the end of the second set. I think they took that set 6-2, but it was mostly a surfing clinic from Belinda and Flavio in the first set 6-3, and Flavio nailed his return winner to start the match tiebreak, passing as well somewhere. But despite Gabby and Lloyd's best efforts to try to come back, this match was sealed by Lloyd's double fault. So the final scoreline was like 6-3 to 6, 10-7 in Belinda and Flavio's favor. For those who followed Belinda playing mixed doubles with Jakub Paul back in the United Cup, This might have been a sign because Belinda won this invitational with Flavio, but let's see if they ended up playing more mixed doubles not only in the Masters 1000 invitationals, but also taking it to the Grand Slam level. Who knows? Besides, back to the other challenger level events for the ATP, Cliff Harper and David Stevenson clinched the Sherwood Challenger title, as well as Stefan Latinovic taking the Kigali 2 Challenger title with Luka Pavlovic. Note that Stefan won the Lugano Challenger with Vitaly Sachko around the fortnight before, so he could be someone to watch as well as he rises in the doubles department. Stefan and Luka defeated Zidane Pantia and Alexander Donsky, which was a revenge to their previous loss in the Kigali 1 Challenger semifinal. And last but not the least, Gianluca Cadenaso and Paulo Andre Saraiva dos Santos stunned first seeds Miguel Angel Reyes Varela and Federico Zeballos 6-3-7-5 to clinch the Santiago Challenger title. Before we close this week's spot, I would also like to add the WTA 125 watch. So I've been following the single sector of both the WTA 125 events. So for those who didn't know, WTA had sort of its own challenger event for the 125, but they do not have the 175 ones the ATP did. So people flock to these 125 events, while the other entry and some mid-level events are handled by the ITF, like 15, 25, 35, 50, 75, and 100 are handled by the ITF. Back to the WTA 125 watch. So I've been tracking the Austin 125, where the semi-finals showed us some colliding journeys, where one half was like some rising players, especially nearby the 100 range, while the other half was more experienced players trying to find their form back. So this resulted into an interesting clash between Bianca Andreescu, who won the 3-set match against Paula Badosa. Both of them were wildcards to this event. Lanlana Terarudi, who won against Kimberly Birrell in the semifinals. And Lanlana won the final 6-3, 3-6, 6-3 to eventually debut in the top 100. And she subsequently withdrew from the Miami qualifying rounds afterward. And the next 125 event I tracked was the Antalya 3 125. So there are 3 125 tournaments in Antalya within the past 3 weeks. And Angelina Kalinina won both of them, like Antalya 2 and Antalya 3. So Angelina won the third week 6-0, 6-3 against Tamara Zidanshek, where she did not drop a set on her journey to the title. Compared to the second week, where Angelina won the title as well, but she dropped 2 sets, including the final against her compatriot Alexandra Olinikova. Not to mention that Angelina also runner-up the Antalya 1 125. So what's in store for the upcoming Challenger week? First of all, welcome to the European Clay Challenger events, which commence this week with events in Murcia and Zadar. For your information, Jesper de Jong had a lot to defend in this swing because he had Murcia runner-up and Madrid Challenger semifinals to defend, and he will start his campaign later on as he takes on his good friend Benjamin Hassan in the first round of the Murcia Challenger. These 2 challengers run alongside Asuncion Challenger, which is Dani Vallejo's home event, and the Mexican Challenger swing continues amid some earlier worry due to another current events. And the Mexican Challenger swing continues in the Morelos Challenger. This is an altitude hard court event, and somehow it continues despite an earlier worry due to some current affairs that resulted in Acapulco 500 being heavily guarded. several months ago. And be sure to cut some slack for the youngsters currently competing in the Miami Masters 1000, either in the qualifying rounds or the main draw later on, because whatever happens to them, including some possible early exits, they still have room to develop because technically they still have years ahead of them. That's it for this week's Yap. Thank you for bearing with me for almost the past hour, and see you next week with a lot more Yaps like this, hopefully.